Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming for my session today. Appreciate it for your time. Today we'll be covering first of things, right? I'm Fernando Cardozo, Director for Product Management for Vision One Cloud Security at the Trend Micro. And today we'll be covering some of the important points about like cyber risk and how you can bring some of those informations to your board. Like how you can simplify the visibility for that specifically risk information to the cloud and bring to the board for these active like conversations, right? First things, little bit of like the agenda today, a little introduction, the significance of like a cloud security, the board's role in the cloud security. I will show like some specifically statistics that can help you to understand what is the importance on this specific aspect, assessing risks in cloud and how you can start in reporting to the board, how you can make that easy, the risk index information to bring to the executive information, and also how you can engage the board on the conversation, right? The first thing here in the overview, this session, it is focused to equip you with a comprehensive understanding of the unique challenge and considerations in cloud security. Along with the practical strategies with the cloud security discussions to the board informations to empower you to bring that information for a better investments and budgeting allocation for your organization. When you think about like the cloud security challenge, there is a couple important things. First, the evolving landscape. There is very like a robust dynamic when we talk about cloud security and hybrid cloud. Alignment with the cloud security with the business. Some people think like cloud security is very isolated, like a silo in the organization, but it is like a very important piece of the business. And they should be very connected with the business needs and the innovation from your organization. Assessing risks in the cloud. Assessing risk, not just in the cloud, but the entire organization is very complex. And I will show you like some ways that you can help you to start understanding your risk in your organization today. And engaging to the board meetings. The first piece, the hybrid cloud journey. A lot of organizations, we talk about like be 100% cloud. But it's very hard for you to like right away out of the gate be like 100% in the cloud, right? We still have a lot of organizations, they have hybrid infrastructure with like a physical servers, virtual machines, and they start migrating to the cloud. They start doing the lift and shift. But when they start realizing the lift and shift, they say like, oh, I can improve those. I can utilize more of those services in the cloud infrastructure. And then they start creating the cloud native technologies. They start utilizing containers. They start utilizing serverless, cloud storage systems, third-party APIs, and many different technologies that can make agile your organization. But not just making agile, you are like modernizing your application and going like faster for your business innovation. This is really critical, right? At the same time, organizations starting thinking about like, oh, there is a couple capabilities that will be interesting in the private cloud. There is a couple capabilities that will be interesting to like breaking down between multiple AWS cloud accounts. And you starting creating this huge number of like cloud assets, cloud accounts that sometimes you don't have a full visibility, okay? And there is a very common going back and forth. There is some applications that you try to transition to the cloud, and there is some cases that you bringing back because compliance, sovereignty, audit process. But there is like this dynamic, and we see more and more organizations with like this entire journey workflow, right? At the same time, many companies came to us and say like, how can I keep the security and the risk visibility for my entire hybrid cloud infrastructure? Looks very simple. But it's very hard for you to find a unique technology, a unique platform that can help you from like the beginning, from like a physical servers, legacy operation systems that I know some of you have here today, to your like very modern application using Lambda functions, using EKS, ECS, Fargate, and many of the things. And I see many people like shaking their heads. And like, this is a very honest conversation here, right? But when we talk about the evolving cloud landscape, I was getting some statistics from ESG. 44% of the organizations feel that threats detection and response is much more difficult or somehow more difficult in the cloud to manage. And this is not just about like because it's more complex in the cloud, it's because you don't have the right tools. Sometimes you are trying to adapt the tools that you have been using in your data center for many different years to the cloud, and they are not the right ones for you to automate that process and make that simple for your organization. This is just like a simple statistics. Another one, 83% do the organizations that they did like some those like surveys, they have moved those applications and those workloads to public cloud. This is really, really important, right? And the second one here, it is 44% finds hybrid setups a holistic view needed. What that means? Remember when I was showing like the hybrid cloud? When you have a specifically application, and that application is communicating with your data center or multiple data centers in your cloud, you have like a private link that is sharing communication back and forth, but how you have a holistic risk visibility of like everything that is going on? Do you have that today? A lot of people don't. If you do, you are very lucky because you have been probably spending a lot of time and effort working with your security teams, cloud architects, DevOps teams, and all those like different like squad teams to create that visibility. But if you don't, please be careful. Like starting looking forward to those details because this is like a very important for the future. If only 83% has moved like those applications, more and more are coming. We know that like a lot of organizations are adopting more and more cloud native services and also cloud infrastructure. One of the interesting things that I got like from PwC, 90% of the banking organizations has reported undertaking some type of remediation activities to bringing their specific cloud services to specific regulations, standards, or frameworks. Like this is interesting, right? This means a lot of organizations, they are creating those cloud infrastructures and by somehow they are not following the best practice. But how you can bring that visibility about best practice and risk to your cloud architect team, to your DevOps teams, to your SRE, to help them to automate that process and keep that flow very like smooth instead of like creating the friction. Cybersecurity and security teams has been very well known as a barrier in some of the innovations in the organizations. But we don't want it to be known as for, right? We want it to be like running together with the innovation and applications teams to show that our security technologies and security toolings can be fully embedded in their pipelines, okay? Another important point when we talk about the board role in the cloud security, the board role, it is starting realizing that cloud security, it is really, really important. And first, legal and regulations consideration. How many of you here, if you can put like hands up, has any kind of like a regulation, high trust, PCI, ISO 27001, FedRAMP, and many others? I see probably kind of like 60% of the room. It's very common because regulations and compliances are very common being requested by your business units because they need to deliver that to the customers, right? The second point, it is alignment of cloud security with the business objectives. Since you have like a really big pressure from auditors, from your security teams about like how to keep the compliance, that needs to be aligned with your business units, right? One interesting aspect too that I was talking with a CISO, and he recently has been invited for a specific board meetings more and more often. And I was talking to him like, why do you think that it's happening, right? And he's like, Fernando, it's interesting to see that the board, like from the organizations, they are starting realizing that security, it is a very important piece for their business. Not just because the audit process or the regulations, but they starting realizing that like a vulnerability, a cloud misconfiguration, or a threat in the cloud can shut down their applications. They can lose access to their applications or their PII data or their information, and that could generate like a huge amount of loss of money. But not just like loss of money, it is loss of like a brand and reputation. Imagine if you have like an organization and that organization has a data breach, right? you won't like trust the same way as you have been trusting that organization because you felt that they were not commitment with the cloud, right? The same way it is like the board are starting understanding more that aspect and inviting CISO and security teams to their meetings for them to actually understand what is the risk of like their companies. Assessing risks in the cloud. The traditional like security guardrails are struggling on how they can bring that visibility in a single pane of glass, not just for the security teams, but also for their development team in a way that they can make that like a process very, very smooth and less complex, right? The traditional technologies, sometimes they only look for internal environment, internal assets, or like only cloud. They don't look for the internal workloads that they have. Like how you can bring that like new innovation technology that can like bring that like a full pane of glass with the risk visibility across your entire organization. Why it's important to assess the cloud risk. 1 in 3 businesses have trouble with spotting threats in their like infrastructure. It's interesting to see that like statistics, right? As more and more organizations use cloud to deliver their innovation, their applications to customers to achieve like a more agile business units in, for their companies, it's very also hard. Like if you're an organization and you have like 10 AWS accounts, right? In a lot of cases, 10 AWS accounts in average will be around, I would say, 15 or 20,000 cloud assets. How do you have a visibility in 20,000 assets if they have like any vulnerability, cloud misconfiguration, or threats that could be affecting your organization, right? This is why like 1 in 3 business units have trouble with spotting threats today because it is a massive number of like assets, right? And how you can start thinking outside the box and starting realizing how to make sure those issues that you may have in your organization are being properly prioritized. Risk scoring, it is a very critical for your business. And I was just like, sorry, I'm like very related to customers. I love to spend time with customers and connect with them. And the recently conversation that I had with a financial services customer, he was like basically trying to find a company or a technology that could be creating like a automated risk scoring for their like the entire cloud infrastructure, right? And because they could not find in the market, right, they felt like, oh, I need to build by myself. And recently I was talking with them for 30 minutes. It's supposed to be like a 30 minutes meeting. And I spent like 3 hours with them. It's like, Fernando, what you are showing me, how you are creating the risk scoring and how you are helping me to prioritize my risks in my cloud infrastructure, it is unbelievable. Because think about this. You have one simple application. The simple application, maybe we have like an internet gateway, you have a security groups, you have like the IAMs, the roles, the EC2s, maybe EKS clusters, RDS, and all those kind of things. If you just like count those 10 different services or 10 different like cloud assets, right? Each of them, they should have like one unique risk scoring. And what that means, it means like you should be connecting and relating with the cloud misconfiguration, the vulnerabilities, the CVEs, the CVSS scores that they may have. What is the risk from those specifically libraries or open source libraries that you are running on those applications? Or does that specifically EC2 has an internet face accessing? It is? If it does, if I have a vulnerability there, how I can make sure that specifically EC2 won't be affecting other cloud services? How do you understand that risk level for that specifically cloud asset, and how do you know that you should be focusing on that specifically EC2 if you don't have this kind of like risk scoring? Is there like I hope like this is being like a little bit clear here. It's like connecting each specific cloud asset with their risks and also measuring their like scoring and actually helping you to to automate how you can prioritize with your teams. And all that information could be shared with like a different like teams in your organization. When you start in conducting like access in your cloud infrastructure, what I recommend to you as a first stage, understand your inventory. Understanding how many like assets do you have in your organization, how many virtual machines, how many container clusters, how many database, and all those kind of things. If you don't have understanding how many assets you have, it's really hard for you to start understanding how, which ones you should be prioritizing first. The next one, it is the risk prioritization. Like, if you have like a basic, like kind of like a cloud misconfiguration technology, how you can connect those cloud misconfigurations with those cloud assets that you find. And then you start in connecting with the vulnerability assessment and how you can connect those CVEs and those AVSS scores with those assets. Understand if they have like an internet-facing assets. Understanding if they have like a PII information that has been processed. Understanding if they have like any kind of like compliance or regulation that that specific environment needs to follow or needs to be compliant with. Okay, that's the first stage that I would recommend. The second part here, it is a way to identify. This is a contextual visibility to help to emphasize the findings that we see, perhaps provide the visibility to leaders to say, this is why it's important for you to focus or to start in fixing, because maybe that's specifically a Lambda function, or maybe that's specifically container, or that specifically EC2 has access to the RDS where we have the secrets for our organization. When you start in realizing that information and you bring that to the board, why you need like 1 million investment to improve the security in like all your productions environments, it is changing the perspective of them. They start in realizing that like this kind of like attacks could be like affecting the organization in many different ways, okay? The other piece here, it's understanding the contextual, as I mentioned, if they have like any like a PII data or sensitive data that it's related with the organization, or if they have like any secrets. Like imagine if I'm like a organization that produce tires. The secrets for my tires, it is really, really important. That's a level 0 priority for me. Anything that has that secret in the rest as a storage, it should be like high priority for me to start in looking in any risk scoring in my visibility. You can start in putting that as a, what we call a criticality severity. You can move from 0 to 10, and any specific alert in that specifically asset, you can basically say, oh, needs to be fixed right now by the cloud security teams. The other piece here is conducting that association with a risk index. Usually, like in our case, the risk index varies between 100 to 0. 100, it is the most critical. It's like the risk level is pretty high, and 0, it is really good. In this case, this organization, as one example, they have like 6 to 1 of like 100. It's a little bit over than like the median risk, right? But it's important to understand here that we are not just talking about bringing the risk for like the cloud assets. We are also correlating the information from your devices, from your users, from your internet-facing assets, from your network, and many different like possibilities, devices that you have in your organization. We also integrate, we could like integrate with like a third parties and bring that visibility for you in a dashboard. But when you are conducting that, please make sure you are not just looking for cloud, but for your entire organization, okay? The second, the sixth step here, it is, okay, if I'm an organization related with like financial services, usually they try to follow AWS well-architected framework. They try to follow PCI DSS, SOX, SOC 2, ISO 27001. Like how I can have a quick map of like multiple compliances that I can bring to my auditors or risk management team to say like, we are good. We are like doing a good job over 80% or something like that. And if you are not, like how we can start in fixing? What is the misconfigurations or the issues in my organization that I should be working with the development team, with the cloud architects, our SREs, for them to start fixing in the early stage instead of like waiting to be in production, okay? The seventh step here, it is the attack surface risk management. How I can bring all those findings, those informations, and starting mapping with a summarized information that I can bring to the board for a better conversation. It's interesting to see like more and more, every time when I hear and I talk with a CISO or cloud security team that goes to the board in some conversations, they need to bring numbers. If they don't bring numbers to the board, they actually don't understand how critical are things in the security. It is really, really important. Please, all the time, when you start creating a report or any information that is going to the board, please try to relate that with numbers that can be associated and make sense for them. In this case here, imagine I have like 100 accounts, 20 of like those accounts are under 75%. In this case, this organization should be over 75. It's like considered critical. Another important point, it is one of those production environments, it should be PCI DSS, but since you are under 75%, the auditors will say like that you fail, and you could be losing the credential for like processing credit cards in your organization, as one example. The other pieces here that you should be considering, it is APIs. How many of you use API Gateway here today? Okay. Are you making sure that you have authentication for every single API endpoint today? If you are not, please do it. We are seeing a big increase of like attacks through the API's endpoints. If you are not checking this, please come back home and start monitoring those kind of like authentications on those API endpoints. Why I'm saying this? Because I was talking with an airlines organization, and they have like 100 API gateways. 100 API gateways, I was expecting to be like a 1,000 API endpoints, but actually not. It was 6,000 API endpoints. How do you make sure that 6,000 API endpoints has authentication and they are not open to the internet for people to collect information from those APIs? And I'm talking about like API endpoints. Those are like providing information about the passengers. They are providing information about the airplanes, the pilots, and names of like the passengers. In some cases, could be like a passports that they have associated with the forms when you are like flying outside or internationally, right? Please, please, please make sure you are validating that. The other pieces here is like container cluster, if they have like any kind of like a runtime protection, if those workloads that you have in AWS, they have like any kind of like a protection for the vulnerabilities, malwares, and also EDR or XDR capabilities that you can have like a visibility of the telemetry. But this is like a little summary that was created with like this risk assessment. It's one example. I'm not saying this is perfect example. I'm just saying this is like one idea of like how you can collect that information. Cloud security strategy. Okay, now that we have like this summary information, how we can stop it like and starting thinking and reflecting how we can improve our strategy with those numbers, right? The first stage here, when you talk about cloud security strategy, I consider the attack surface risk management. Why I consider this, it is kind of like a proactive way. How I can be more proactive and stopping waiting to actually have any problem in my infrastructure for like then to start like remediating or doing like any kind of like fix. And basically in the numbers in the summary that I just showed, like one way could be how we can increase the level of compliance for every single the accounts that we have for over 70 or 75% as one example. The second one, it is apply patch or virtual patching technologies to prevent any vulnerabilities. If you have any kind of like high risk vulnerability and you are like a PCI organization, you have a very short period of time for you to fix that vulnerability or for you to create some kind of like ways to remediate and protect that vulnerability in your infrastructure. Having ways that you can be more proactive, like saying, if I find any high critical vulnerability, like if my team has time to fix that with a server spec, with like checking if there is like an available patch, then do it. If not, here's like the proactive way to protecting the IDS and IPS as one example, right? Creating this kind of like a strategy it's really critical. The second one is making sure you have the authentication in every single API gateway, or bring the contextual visibility of like the risk to your SOC operations. This is very, very important too. A lot of the organizations that I have been talking with, the SOC operations teams, they are kind of like a little bit disconnected with the cloud teams. I don't know if you feel that in your organization, but if you do, please try to connect more with your SOC teams and the cloud teams, because some cases that I see, it is cloud security teams come to the SOC, say like, oh, I had one incident in my cloud account. And the SOC team say like, but I don't have any visibility in your cloud account. Like, how can I help you? You know? And they start creating this conflict and this friction between each other. Please make sure like the technology that you are using in the cloud security, they are tied in and connected with your SOC operations. Because this way they have the visibility and the ability to do the detection and response to the cloud as the same way that they are doing for endpoints, email, and other pieces of your organization. The second part here, it is the cloud detection and response. A lot of organizations that I talk with, they mention about like CloudTrail, it is awesome. I can like connect with my audit teams if I need it, or my security teams if I need it. But I don't know how I can be proactive. How can I look at the information in the CloudTrail and starting detecting any suspicious activities with the IAM, with like privilege escalation, or with like a data S3 exfiltration that could be happening in my infrastructure, or any additional suspicious activities that I could be relating inside the CloudTrail. This is actually important. Please look it up like closely, how you can ingest that information and start finding suspicious activities on that. It is a very, very valuable information, but you need to utilize being more proactive on that. Centralize your visibility for container telemetries and workloads in the cloud with the CloudTrail. When you combine those telemetries all together, you have amazing visibility of like what could be happening inside of your infrastructure. Please make sure those correlations are happening. In some cases, they are just like looking for the CloudTrail. In some cases, they are just looking for the container visibility or the workloads. But when you combine that like telemetry all together, this is really, really powerful. The protection part. The protection part, it is critical for organizations, since you are trying to be more proactive and then like reactive and proactive together when you talk about cloud detection and response. Protection, it's a really important part that like, imagine if you have like a 1,000 instance every day. Your team, it is really hard for them to like remediate in every single detection. But when you have a runtime protection or any kind of like a IDS and IPS protection that you can prevent specifically attacks, that can help you to minimize and basically be more like a narrow down in like specifically events that is happening in your cloud infrastructure. Those are like a good example of like how you could create some these strategies based on the numbers that we just collect together. By 2026, 70% of the board will include one member of cybersecurity with experience to their conversations. Why is that? Remember when I talk about the board is starting realizing more about like the risks with their application? The importance of information security, it is rising rapidly. As executives became aware of the poor security could be generating any like specifically problems for their organization, image, and also like generating any kind of like loss in budgeting, right? And this could be irreparable damage to the organization. This is really important that they are starting realizing this kind of like approach. When you start engaging with the board, please make sure you follow like 5 major points, right? risk communication and real-time metrics. Like as much as you have those numbers in real time, instead of like being like a 15 days like old or something like that, like if you can generate those metrics in real time, and sometimes you can bring that like dashboard with those numbers, it could be beneficial because they could be like trusting you more. So like, this is right now. I'm not just like changing those numbers. This is like what we can see, right? That's important. Align with the business goals. Try to understand more closely where your organization are trying to go. Oh, are you planning to use more serverless in like 3 or 4 years? Starting thinking how you can be like creating the security, the same level as you have for containers, for workloads, but for serverless, right? Try to understand where is the dynamics of your like business and where they are trying to focus on in the future for you to align with the strategy of the cloud security. Board's education about cybersecurity and cloud security, right, is really, really important. As much as they start understanding that security is important, making sure you are like teaching them about like the importance of like cybersecurity, it is critical. Budget and resources justification. How you can map those risks with the budget that you are requesting to the board team for investments in the future, it is also important. Instant response planning. Instead of like you waiting for have like some ways to respond for instant, try to create that planning for the instant response right away. If you have any problems in the cloud, have like a steps by steps how your organization should be responding to that specific instant. It is important too. I hope none of you here you have that need, right? But having that as a backup, as a planning, it's important for you. And defining a goal, right? Many organizations sometimes they don't define like a very clear goal where the organization should be meeting or going, right? In that case, we saw the organization was 61, right? How can maybe a CISO say like, oh, let's define a goal as our risk index should be 30. And you bring that to the board. They will understand that number because you show the background information of that number. You show why you have that risk, right? All those kind of things. And they will start understanding that like under like 30, it is a low level of like risk of the organization. Establish a comprehensive cybersecurity objective by centralizing cloud accounts, workloads, and application visibility with a unified cybersecurity platform. It is very important for you to have this kind of like risk index. The same way as is training, like make it like a more strong way how you are protecting your vulnerabilities in the cloud, right? If you are detecting any vulnerabilities in your containers, in your like EC2s or in your Lambdas, how are you protecting them? How are you like mitigating those vulnerabilities quicker before some attackers find out, right? It is important. Increase the risk context for cloud accounts and application. As we show like with the graphs and the visibility, how you can help that visibility for the SOC operations. And if you start thinking like SOC operations, sometimes they see alerts, they see a lot of warnings and incidents in their backend with the SIM and all those kind of things. How you can bring the context for them to understand what is the criticality of that incident, it is important, right? This kind of like a contextual visibility can help them to also understand who are the owners. Which squad team are creating those microservices with like high vulnerability in production? Who are like the SREs or cloud architects putting together the pipelines that are not checking those vulnerabilities before pushing to production? This is not like pointing fingers, but this is like working together. How the security teams can work together with the SREs and cloud architects to create a more dynamics that can be validating security before pushing to production. Think about this. It is better for you to starting remediating and preventing those issues before going to production or after going to production. Most of you, like for sure, prefers to like protect before. Not just because problems or concerns, but also for cost. Fixing a problem in production is way more expensive than fixing a problem in the early stage of your pipelines, because you don't need to be running, you don't need to be testing, you don't need to have the penetration testings and all those kind of things. If you can minimize that early as possible in your pipelines or into your IDEs, it is very critical and better for your organization. They will be saving a lot of money. Guarantee the runtime protection, it is in place in all workloads. Sometimes, because they don't have the visibility of the entire inventory, they don't understand if those workloads are being protected. If you have that visibility about the inventory and to make sure every single those workloads has the protection that is needed, it is important. This way you can start understanding, oh, if I have 10,000 EC2s, are those 10,000 EC2s are being protected against malwares, against vulnerabilities, against specifically new threats, right? Or not? How you can make sure that visibility for you as one example. This is just defining goal and trying to be more clear with the board. What is the numbers that you are trying to achieve, okay? The closing thoughts here. The first point, right? Assessing risk across your organization is critical for more strategic conversation with the board. If you don't have the numbers, if you don't have the metrics and the ideas, what is going on in your infrastructure, it is really hard for you to talk with the board, right? Do you agree with that? The second point, it is align the cloud security with the business. Make sure when you are presenting those defining goals, they are fully aligned with where your organization are trying to spend the next 3 or 5 years investments and budgeting for the future. Have a strategy to bring the board in a way that will be more clear for them to understand the investments that they are putting in cloud security. Sometimes the board will say, oh, I have spent $10 million, but looks like we are not that secure. If you are bringing those statistics every time when you have meeting with them and showing the evolution and showing that you are decreasing the risk level with the index, then you are showing the progression. You are showing how you are grabbing that investment and putting for better things in your organization. And the last thing here would be the define clear goals to allow the board to understand where you are and where you want to be, right? All those informations all together can help you to have a completely different conversation with your board teams, with your executives teams, with your CISO. And if you are success after applying those, please let me know. I would love to hear, right? And I would love to open for some open